In the middle of the book of Revelation, there are three angels' messages for all people in the last days. Just before the return of Jesus, these angels are flying so swiftly with messages so important and is carried with urgency. These three angels' messages going out to the whole world are cosmic messages that have eternal bearing. Heeding to these messages or rejecting them will forever seal one's destiny. And today, I want to focus particularly on the foundational message of the first angel, which says, "Fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment has come. Worship Him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." This message is asking us to consider the Creator. We are His creation. The world and the fullness of it comes from God. The universe comes from God. This message is for us today. A message when the first world countries, when the world leading economies, when the capitalist nations, when the Western culture is on its peak, saturating everyone with its culture, its educational system, with its philosophy, enforcing a no-God policy as they hijack educational systems, science textbooks, museums, public schools, and many others. At the time of a pandemic, when everyone is seeking for financial help, at a time when the economy is sabotaged so that people would be dependent on human agencies and the powers that be, at a time when human beings are in a vulnerable position for control and manipulation due to the need to survive, this first angel's message calls us to acknowledge that there is God who created everything and is the source of everything that we have. The message is calling, worship Him who made the heavens and the earth, the sea and the springs of water. The world has been duped to accept atheistic evolution, particularly in the first world countries. There are untruthful claims saying that you cannot do science without believing in evolution. Another claim is saying that all scientists believe in evolution. They claim that if you are a creationist, you cannot also be a scientist. These claims are not true. I have members of the church and also friends who are scientists and they believe in creation. Actually, there are thousands of PhD scientists all over the world who don't accept evolution and don't accept the belief in millions of years. These creationist scientists see the harmony in the words of science and the words of the Bible. It is the atheistic scientists that have problems with creation and created this harmony between Bible and science. Creation and evolution is not a religious argument versus a scientific argument. It is not religion versus science. It is actually a worldview clash. Two different views of origin that collide. Actually, it is atheistic evolutionary worldview against creationist worldview. And when it comes to the root of the argument, it is actually an ontological argument. An argument concerning the very nature of reality that surrounds us. And there are only two possibilities. Either the universe and all of us came about through a purely natural physical process without intervention, or somebody intelligent designed and created us. And so please, indulge with me as I bring you along the lines of the atheistic scientists and as we attempt to join with them in the realm of their discipline and in our effort to speak their language. Let me begin by saying the story of creation, as recorded in Genesis and is now repeated by the first angel in the book of Revelation, is far more rational and scientific than evolution. Now, what makes more sense to you? A rational God who created a rational world that can be studied rationally, or an irrational, meaningless process that somehow resulted in a rational world that can be studied rationally? It doesn't even make sense. The Big Bang, evolution, the millions of years, and naturalistic origin of life, written in all science textbooks for all children and students to study, including yours, are not scientific. Is Big Bang observable and repeatable? No. Is millions of years observable and repeatable? No. Origin of life. Has anybody ever made life from the non-life? No. You see, evolution is not scientific fact. The millions of years is not a scientific fact either. You have to understand that atheistic evolution forced upon students as truth violates the known discoveries and established laws of science. Let's look at thermodynamics, for instance. Evolutionary theory claims that organisms get better ordered over time, that is, from simple to more complex organisms. But the second law of thermodynamics holds that entropy increases, that is, systems over time become more disordered. To illustrate this, if you toss and throw several bricks, which kind of pile of bricks would you likely produce? Is it this or this? Of course, the random-looking bricks. The randomness of those bricks is what the second law of thermodynamics means. When you throw several bricks, that means the entropy increases. The result of that is you will have a random-looking pile of bricks after you have thrown them. You see, when entropy increases, that's the activity, the randomness increases as well. The higher the entropy, the higher the disorder. Because as gas expands in a system, entropy increases. More energy put into the system excites the molecules and the amount of random activity. And so the evolutionist paradigm that organisms evolved and increased their activities from simple into more complex forms, that means molecules rising in activities, and yet got better ordered and arranged and became perfectly balanced, now teeming with all forms of life in a fine-tuned planet that we live in now, violates this established law of physics. Based upon the second law of thermodynamics, if ever evolution happened on its own, it should have been an evolution of chaos and randomness by now, instead of harmony, order, and balance that we see all around us. This fine-tuned planet with the right amount of oxygen that is compatible with our lungs cannot be a random thing. Our exact distance from the sun, so we don't get burned if too close or get frozen if too far. These things are not random. We are spinning every 24 hours at the speed of almost 1,000 miles per hour, spinning like a top. In addition to our spinning of almost 1,000 miles per hour, we are also hurtling and orbiting through space around the sun at the speed of more than 66,000 miles per hour for the entire 365 days. You see, it's a frightening thought to travel in space at these enormous speeds and no one is in charge. There is nothing random about that. It is planned, it is designed. It is God who created a perfect habitat for all the flora and the fauna and the humans to thrive and to flourish in this planet. And the next one is biogenesis. The law of biogenesis says that all life comes from pre-existing life. Life can only come from life. And yet evolution says that life can come from non-life. But we see no examples or evidences of non-life turn into life. Anytime they have done these sorts of origin of life experiments, where they're trying to take a soup of all these different molecules, add a little bit of lightning, cook everything together, add a spark, and out comes a useless gunk. They have to do a lot of tweaking to come up with the best result. And what is the result? Just amino acids, no life, no meaningful information as far as real DNA is concerned. You see, the odds for 250 chemical parts coming together is 2 times 1004 to the power of 6. That is 2 with a 46 zeros after it. Those are terrible odds for the first cell to even come into existence all by itself. It is impossible for these natural causes to come together to form life on their own. Life can only come from life and from the giver of life. So far, no scientist or atheist can produce life from any matter, and they will never ever be able to do that. The other thing why evolution does not make sense is on one of the most fundamental laws of science, the law of cause and effect. You see, for every material effect that we see, there is a cause that came before it or concurrent to it. Evolution claims that somehow matter had spontaneously come into existence without a prior cause. The idea that the universe just popped into existence from nothing is simply not a scientific idea. You see, they postulate that the origin of the Big Bang is caused by this thing called singularity. That singularity is natural, but it suddenly behaves supernatural. And so, in essence, the Big Bang that they want us to believe did not follow the laws of nature. It was supernatural, but without any supernatural cause or any reason. Our planet, actually, and all of us living here, to come into being like this has no physical explanation. Both creationists and evolutionists can agree that our existence is something miraculous. Evolutionists are admitting that a miracle really happened, but to them, it happened all by itself. Now, for the creationists, that miracle points to a supernatural creator who caused the natural things to assemble supernaturally to turn these into reality that we are now. And so the effect was supernatural through a supernatural cause. That is cause and effect. Another very funny teaching in the evolutionists and atheistic science textbooks is about this so-called geologic column with millions upon millions of years. You and I were taught in school, and until now our children are, that each layer represents a period of time, and it was deposited over millions and millions of years. But in reality, each layer is simply showing the order of how things were buried. You see, both land and sea creatures are found throughout the geologic column. Sea creatures are found from the lowest to the highest layers, and even on top of the mountains. In fact, 90% of the Earth's land surface is made up of sedimentary layers, which are rock layers that formed in water. The sediments are not a process of millions of years. They appear like that because there was a previous turmoil causing erosions brought by the waters that steer them, and when the steering subsided, they arranged in such a way. Geologists confess that the Earth is actually riddled with massively eroded features, like the Grand Canyon in America, the Blythe River Canyon in South Africa, and the Kapiti Valley in Australia. And yet, evolutionists still refuse to acknowledge a worldwide flood. Now, 2,000 years before our modern technology came, Peter already predicted these evolutionists to come in our day called the last days, meaning we are living in the last days of Earth's history. Look at this. There shall come in the last days scoffers who are willingly ignorant, that the earth, being overflowed with water, perished. St. Peter warned us in advance this rejection of truth about the worldwide flood during Noah's time would happen in the last days. The fossils that are unearthed are actually not the evidence of the history of life. They are the evidences of the death of so many lives during Noah's flood. The flood explains how all those things got buried. There are sea creatures on the tops of the Himalayas, the Alps, the Andes, and the Rockies. How did they get up there? Even creatures that don't have any hard parts, such as the fossilized worms and even fossilized animal manure, are found. How can a fossilized animal manure be fossilized slowly and gradually over hundreds, thousands, or millions of years? It doesn't happen. The reason why even a delicate worm is fossilized is because it was buried in an instant as an activity of the worldwide flood. Every fossil that is unearthed is contradicting the story of the evolutionists. In 2009, Mary Schweitzer, a paleontologist and evolutionist, made the first popularized discovery of soft tissues in a dinosaur bone. Now remember, they are saying that the dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago. But here is a dinosaur bone discovered, and it has blood vessels and cells, DNA and proteins, all of which decay quickly, yet are still intact. Now, if the dinosaur bone is covered slowly and gradually in the slow process of 65 million years, there will be no DNA, no blood vessels, and protein left in the bone. And Mary Schweitzer herself said, "This flies in the face of everything we understand about how tissues and cells degrade. I can't explain it, to be honest." Schweitzer can't explain it, and neither can her colleagues, who also cling to the evolutionary paradigm. The only explanation as to why those DNA, blood vessels, and proteins are still intact is because the way the dinosaur was buried was through an instant process. Therefore, the fast decaying parts happen to remain in there. Another biblical and scientific reason as to why those millions of years and evolution is not acceptable is through observational science, with living things in their kind, such as the animals. In the creation account, it says that God created according to their kind, or after their kind, not through any evolutionary long gradual process. You don't have one kind developing into another kind. They are all created according to their kind. So even though you get a variety of pumpkins, for instance, they are not changing into other things. They remain pumpkins. Bacteria are not changing into more complex creatures. Yes, you can have great variation within a kind. You can get different species forming, which is what Darwin really saw. But there are limits to it, because there are no mechanisms at all in genetics to add in new information that never existed in order to change one kind into a totally different kind. Observational science can confirm that dogs always remain dogs, cats always remain cats. There is nothing in observational science to contradict what the Bible already declared, that every animal will bring forth after its own kind. You can observe in the existing creation around us and in the fossil record. Nothing. You see, Genesis passes the test of scientific method. Evolution does not.